Hey everybody, welcome back to another Q&A. This is actually in addition to the other recent Q&A, which will come out soon, but I had some other questions that were dropped in there after the fact, so I'm going to cover those as well. For reference, today is May 13th, 2024. So first question is when and why there's an implementation of thyroid meds with usage of GH. So why would be that there's some potential for disruption in T4 to T3 conversion. When is probably not necessary, at least anecdotally from what I've seen. There could be a temporary downregulation in the amount of T4 that's converted into T3. However, assuming that you're not somebody with already very poor conversion of T4 to T3, I've not really seen that to be an issue, in which case probably no need for additional thyroid medication, at least in my experience. So not really something that I've ever used with anyone. EOD, I'm assuming every other day. TD, training day maybe, or lagging body part usage of GH. Ever went with any of these protocols? Yeah, I mean, theoretically, you could probably utilize additional amounts, or if you're limited on the total amount because of budget or something like that, it could be utilized only on the days that you're training lagging body parts, simply because you're getting that benefit from the IGF release on the days that you're training. However, if that wasn't so much a concern from like a total budget standpoint or something like that, then it could just be used every day or every training day or something like that. There's probably not going to be any huge inherent benefit or anything that's going to be super noticeable from only doing it on lagging body parts versus other days. Other things that are most likely going to make the biggest difference are really regulating your training in a way using like specialization phases or prioritization phases for those body parts so they're getting adequate volume to actually create adaptation and grow. But yeah, I mean, that's certainly a viable option, especially if the total amount that you can allocate because of budget is limited, then it's probably going to be best used on those days for the lagging parts. Minimum effective dose of GH for bodybuilding, as someone who's never used it. I mean, anything over 0 is going to have some effect. Now, it would depend on the application. If you're talking about more of a fat loss scenario where you're looking for free fatty acid release, then something along the lines of 2 to 3 IUs in a singular dose in a baseline insulin state, meaning fasted more or less, or far enough away from meals, it's probably going to have about the maximal free fatty acid release from that dosing. Pretty similar from an IGF standpoint if you're looking to use it in more of a hypertrophy scenario in combination with other compounds. Pretty similar. Limitations on how much IGF your body can produce at once. You know, it's not like you can unlimitedly, I don't even know if that's a word, produce more and more and more with greater and greater dose. There's going to be some cap on that at some point, and it is going to be person dependent. I mean, even for example, I mean, we could see that in blood work with people when they would administer it and then check IGF levels. Why is there so much variance from person to person? I mean, every person can produce a different amount of IGF even with the same dose of GH, even assuming it's like the same product. So it's not necessarily like a 1 + 1 = 2 type of equation, but yeah, I mean, that's 2 to 3 units in a single dosage is going to give you the benefit that you're looking for. And if you want to increase the amount of dosages spread throughout the day, depending on the scenario, that can be done, but it would depend on the goal in the application because it would be used differently in different applications. Curious about the legitimacy of the Saltine cracker test and associated carb intake. Never done it. I've heard of it. I have no idea if it's valid or not, so I can't really comment on it. I have no opinion up, down, sideways, or otherwise. So nothing I can really say about that. Science behind or benefits of walking before or after meals and before or after weightlifting. We're talking about meals specifically. Potential benefit is glucose control, seeing potentially less of a spike in postprandial glucose with people that are walking after meals. I wouldn't go as far as to say that that's like something that's been studied in many instances. However, anecdotally, it's certainly something that we've seen in a lot of people just by testing it. Similarly, before meals, creating a bit more sensitivity. But with weightlifting, So weightlifting in and of itself is going to at least acutely increase insulin sensitivity, GLUT4 translocation. I mean, stuff like that. It's pretty good at doing that. Yes, if you added more walking or something in there, of course, and it were intense enough to deplete glucose, it were more glucose intensive cardio, then that would probably add additional benefit to some extent. With that like line of thinking, then you're probably going to be like walking all day long nonstop. So I mean, there has to be some thought of like calorie balance in total amount of activity as well. Just simply doing 20,000 steps a day on a regular basis is probably going to have some downside to it over time. So keep that in mind and not get too carried away with those things. But definitely as a general recommendation, if you can get up and get a little bit of movement in after eating, for sure. Yeah, potentially beneficial from a glucose control standpoint. If we have 1 or 2 consecutive nights with bad sleep due to travel, different routine, etc., is it maybe worth it to have the same calorie intake, or potentially lower, but to eat fewer carbs and bump fats a little bit more due to lower ability to metabolize glucose? It's a good question. Now, where is this question coming from? Well, we do know that even one night of poor sleep can impact insulin sensitivity acutely and blood glucose levels acutely. I mean, we see that. We can easily see if someone gets, a poor night of sleep, we can see like a higher fasting glucose in them a lot of the time. If this were happening on a regular basis, then that would be more of like, hey, we need to correct the sleep issue. This person's asking specifically about utilizing some changes in nutrition in this instance where there's a couple nights of poor sleep. My thought on this is probably no. It's probably splitting hairs for the vast majority of people. I mean, on paper, does it pan out that way? Potentially, maybe, but you also have to remember that fats also contribute to insulin resistance as well, and just as much as carbohydrate. Again, there's context in there. Calorie surplus is really going to be probably the largest contributing factor to insulin resistance over time, other than like acute things like stress accumulation. So is it really worth changing your nutrition in that instance? I mean, you could, but I really doubt it's going to make any difference other than to make you feel better when you look at your glucometer. I personally probably wouldn't worry about it. Just get back to routine as quickly as possible, because then everything's going to return to normal relatively quickly. And again, if it is something that's happening all the time, then we have a different problem, which is the sleep and the routine, and there would need to be some adjustments based on that. Last question, BPC 157, such thing as too much regarding dosing and or duration. I don't have an exact answer for that. However, I am sure there is an upper limit somewhere. Something that probably doesn't have quite enough research to draw a conclusion on. And there may be. If there is, I'm not fully aware of it, so I don't really have an answer on that. I mean, BPC or body protective compound is something that we have endogenously, but like anything, I mean, I would imagine you could probably take too much. What that would do, I don't know. So if you have an answer to that, let me know. Never really ventured too much outside of like typical dosing schemes. However, there are a lot of people that have dosed these healing type peptides, whether it be TB500 or BPC, fairly high for long durations, and I've never seen anything. Now, if it was causing some kind of structural issue or some kind of damage internally, it would probably take a long time to notice it. But I've never actually seen or heard of any instance where there was like an acute reaction to taking like a massive dose or some kind of poor outcome from that. So take that for what it's worth. But that is it. Glad we got the part 2 finished, and I will talk to you guys next time.